In this video, we'll take a look at some of the hardware requirements and improvements for Windows Server 2022, beginning with some of the main installation requirements. As for the processor, a 1.4 gigahertz 64-bit processor is the minimum to install, and likewise, at least 2 gigabytes of RAM are required if installing the desktop experience. Now, as is always the case with minimum requirements, they are just that, minimum. There is almost no situation where you would want to install Windows Server 2022 with only its minimum hardware requirements in a production environment. These values might be acceptable for testing and evaluation, but they would almost certainly be inadequate for supporting any real world workloads. At least 32 gigabytes of disk space is required, and a network adapter that supports 1 gigabit per second throughput is also required. As for memory enhancements, it was mentioned earlier that the minimum amount of RAM required is 2 gigabytes, but in fact, it's only 512 megabytes if you're installing Core only. 2 gigabytes is only required for the desktop experience, but again, neither of those are very practical values. So, due to the potentially very large and memory intensive workloads that may be running, such as SQL Server databases, Windows Server 2022 supports a maximum of an astonishing 48 terabytes of RAM, twice as much as Server 2019. As for more realistic workloads, Windows Server 2022 supports an unlimited number of logical processor cores, but a maximum of 64 physical sockets. So there would, of course, be a practical limit on the number of logical cores, but that would be dependent on the physical processor architecture. On that note, it's worth mentioning the Core Info utility. Now, this is not part of Windows Server 2022, but it's downloadable as part of the sysinternals suite of tools and can be run from the command line once installed to provide you with a mapping between the physical and logical processors in your system. It's ideal for confirming the capabilities of your CPUs to ensure that they'll support the workloads you want to host on your servers. And finally, for those very demanding and mission critical workloads, Windows Server 2022 provides support for the Intel Secured Guard extension, or SGX, on Intel Ice Lake processors, which can effectively utilize the very high CPU and memory capabilities of Windows Server 2022, such as 48 terabytes of RAM and thousands of logical processor cores. And it enhances security by isolating workloads from each other in protected memory spaces, resulting in more reliable and high-performing applications and services. Again, the features and hardware you require will depend on your specific circumstances, of course, but Windows Server 2022, with its enhanced capabilities, is up to the task of running almost any workload in a high-performing, reliable, and secure manner.